On? Hi, thanks for coming. The talk is Bad Accessibility Happens. That doesn't have to be the end. If you want the resources and also a link to the slides without the speaker's notes, because I have to edit those, it's at dragun.tech/PyCascades. And I also have started a Slack for people who are disabled and in tech. So if that's you, you can join that at bit.ly/disabled-in-tech. A little about me, I am a tech evangelist right now, but I was a web developer, and I spent a lot of time doing accessibility audits and work at PBS, on pbs.com, and other sites like that. And it kind of gave me like a really good appreciation for just how much we can change as far as accessibility goes, and also how many people aren't even doing the bare minimum, which is, I guess, kind of how this talk came about. For just a really brief overview of the most basic thing about web accessibility, is basically that it means that everyone, regardless of like their physical or mental or developmental disabilities, can use the web. And it doesn't necessarily mean that like everyone has to be a super user like you. Like my father has no disabilities and isn't quite sure what a URL is, and someone with a disability who is also not quite sure what a URL is should be able to use the web in about the same way, and should be able to create things on the web and interact with people in about the same way. But of course, this talk is about bad accessibility, which implies it's pretty easy to get wrong. Accessibility is often an afterthought to people, and I think this is one of the main reasons that a lot of it goes badly. It's not really taught. I went to a boot camp and we didn't learn it. I know a lot of people that went to schools and they didn't learn it. And obviously, if you take a lot of online tutorials, you don't learn it. My clicker stopped working. Oh well. So also, another reason is that it's not taught to most designers or product managers. So when developers are getting specs or something or being told they have to create something, it might just be impossible to make it accessible. Sad, but true. Okay, it's not that it's not working, it's just very slow. It's horrible. Hold on a second. Okay, also like the thought process is really taught, because it's not just like about what you can do, it's about why you should be doing it, how you should be doing it, and who you should be doing it for, and your specific users even, as opposed to just like everyone that might have accessibility needs. And it also involves like working with code that some people aren't as comfortable with. You could possibly have to do like a deep dive into HTML or CSS or JavaScript. And the thing about JavaScript is that a lot of people aren't particularly fond of it or find it a little intimidating or whatever, but it's really great with DOM manipulation, and it's also really great at making up for the differences in how browsers treat HTML and other accessibility stuff. But what we'll be going through isn't going to include a lot of code. I'm going to be talking about examples, and they're examples of like really bad accessibility, and I'm going to be talking about how they're avoided or improved, but I'm not going to do like a deep dive into the actual code because we don't really have a lot of time for that, and I don't want anyone to like feel uncomfortable because they don't know JavaScript. This talk started because of an informal survey results I got. I was like thinking like, I've seen a lot of bad accessibility and all of my friends have, so I want to find out more about it. And so I just did it on like Twitter, and I got a bunch of results, and a lot of them said about the same stuff. So it was like, you can't get rid of modals with a keyboard. You're ARIAing everything. There's no outline on focus. There's like a lot of useless alt text. And also, like, poor contrast for text was a major one. And if you didn't understand any of the words I just used, we'll go over those. So first and foremost, most people agree that issues with text are like exceptionally bad because obviously the text is like a major part of a lot of websites. And there's ways to mitigate a lot of it. Browsers have accessibility settings, so you can like put in a minimum font size you want to use and just have everything at like 20-point font all the time. And you should probably try that if you're doing any front-end stuff just to see if it breaks your site. But the major thing with text that's harder to get across is contrast. So contrast is like the difference between the text and the background of the text. This particular one is from a design website that I've been on. And it's white text on a light pink ombre background. So it's particularly just lovely, right? So I took that background, the darkest of the light pinks in the background, and I put it through a color contrast checker. This one's by WebAIM. It's the first site that comes up if you Google color contrast analyzer. But there's like lots of other ones, and this just kind of compares foreground and background, and it tells you the level that they get to. WCAG is like the standards that generally people use. They're by the W3C, so if you know anything about HTML, you've probably been to their website. And AA is like the minimum. Some places require AAA. Certain provinces for certain things might require that coming up, but it compares foreground and background and also the size of your text. Like if it's giant, will it work? This one's a no, obviously. Wasn't really surprised. And they also use like a Chrome extension, and this is just like the Chrome accessibility developer tools that just go straight into your DevTools, and you inspect something, and it will give you like an option for like what you can change the colors to get them to work. And so that's going AA is 3.03 in that, and the actual contrast ratio is 1.72 for the light pink and white, so that's really bad. But if you want to change the color, if you're allowed to change the color, that's a really good way to do it. You can also like look at different color websites like Color Hex and that sort of thing, and they'll suggest darker shades. But I know sometimes that one's kind of hard to get past designers. This is my other major example of contrast fail on design websites. This is a translucent background for a tag that explains what it is. In this case, it's architecture, and the translucent background's blue, and for some reason the text is like a medium gray, and that's over a picture that also obscures it. It's not the worst one from the site. I just wanted one you could actually kind of see. But like in this case, like you could just make it darker, or the text lighter and the background darker. You could make it not translucent, because you don't really need it to be translucent. Or you could just not put it over the picture. Like that's also an option that you could run with. Just say it's like too difficult to put it over the pictures or something. Alt text is like another version of text, but you're not actually seeing it. It's interacting mostly with screen readers, and it's basically like adding descriptions to links and images so that people that can't necessarily see what is on the screen will still get something out of them. So these examples are using Mac's Voiceover. So if you do Command F5 on a Mac, you can get Voiceover. And it's just their screen reader. It works with lots of other things. And it gives you like the actual text at the bottom of your browser when you're going through, in this case, Chrome. So what people hear for this is link image \YH5BAEAAAA and so on. Like that's how the screen reader reads it. In this case, obviously, like if you had done something with the path, like pretty it up, use the title of the article about puppies it's linking to, it would have been like a lot easier on the screen reader. Or just like put in some alt text for a link. This is another one. You know, they love to put advertisements on stuff, but a lot of people can't even interact with them. Not that, you know, you necessarily want to interact with an advertisement, but this is like link, image, advertisement. And it was like $5 off something. I don't know. People might want to see that advertisement. You know, might want to like go in and view the page and get that $5 off. But this is another way you can like push back. You can be like, well, you know, we have ads that we get revenue from, but if we don't have an accessible site, we're losing some customers that could be using those ads. I don't know. Ads, people like them. And then this is probably my favorite that mixes the last example about color contrast with the example about alt text. So this looks like a table, and it has like not great color contrast with pink and light pink background. And it's not a table, it's an image of a table. And the alt text is just like a restatement of the section header on the page. This is also a design website. So it like made no sense to me. And it has a link, but the link just links to like an empty version of a form like this that doesn't have any of the examples. So it's kind of useless. So I was doing HTML in the 90s. You know, GeoCities, AngelFire, all of that. I understand tables are kind of like traumatic to some of us. Certainly nested tables are something like I have nightmares about. But this is tablature data. It's actually meant to go in a table, and you can make all of this with HTML and CSS. It's not difficult. So like putting in an image is kind of weird because now not everyone can interact with it. If people zoom in on it, it's going to get blurry. It's just not a good idea. But also, like, remember when you're doing alt text, that context really matters because it's not, again, about just what you need to put in. It's about your user as well. The classic example that you'll find everywhere is like, think about like an old piece of art and you have it up on your site. And if you're an art site, you might want to talk about the medium, the brush strokes, all of that. And if you're a history site, you might want to talk about like what's happening in the art or something about the artist or something like that. Because that's what's relevant to your users and what's going on your site. ARIA is it's kind of like alt text. It allows you to interact with assistive technology, and you can give things a lot more information that allows screen readers to work better with them and other things. So you can give things like rules, like is it a menu, is it a slider? You can give things state, is a checkbox checked or not? You can also give things like lengthier descriptions. And also, like, if something changes, like, say you have a long registration form, and they get something wrong when they click register, and you have, like, an announcement at the top that a screen reader user wouldn't notice, you can get an alert for that. So it's pretty nice. It's also really overused, because you can put ARIA on basically everything. You know, and you can do, like, 2-paragraph-long ARIA descriptions if you wanted to. You shouldn't, and they're really awful to screen reader users, but people do it. Like, you have a shopping cart icon, it's an SVG. You can put a little, like, ARIA described by, and then a description, and it can be all about, like, this flat, black and white cart with 4 wheels, and this and that, and all the person wants to know is that we'll take them to their shopping cart. They don't care what it looks like. In fact, the W3C have standards for authoring ARIA, and they even say, like, no ARIA is better than bad ARIA. because you can overwhelm people, and you can also accidentally contradict and override other accessibility on your website by over-ARIA-ing stuff. Unfortunately, there's like no quick fix for this one. I just really wanted to mention it because like I've been going through sites on screen readers preparing this talk, and it's been really awful. But there's lots and lots of resources on it, like the W3C page I mentioned and a bunch of others. So like it's easy to study on your own, I feel like. And also like just an honorable mention for Captions, which is another solution for usability and conveying information. If for some reason you haven't seen closed captions, they're like really descriptive subtitles on videos, or like that text on GIFs that will be like, fake gasp. That's kind of like a caption. Lots of people use them. They're actually like really good for lots of different groups. Obviously, there's like hearing impaired or deaf users, but also people who are in a meeting and watching a video and not supposed to be can listen to it on mute. People learning the language who might need like help with the words, or like people who can't understand it for other reasons. Like if I got up here and used like my family's Pittsburghese accent, you might want like captions here. And getting away from like text, like it's not just what you're giving people, it's also like how you're conveying that information. And the organization on your site is super important for accessibility. This is just something I threw together. It's like a bunch of like different text blocks that are like not defined and all over the place. But if you imagine like a few pictures and like some videos cutting up the text, it's like every news site, right? And like this is really hard to read in general, but if you have like an intention issue, it's very distracting. If you're low vision, it's like hard to see where the text breaks up and like what the different text blocks are. There's like a lot of reasons why this organization is bad. And if you make it like just a little better, like add borders around the text boxes, it gets a lot nicer. But then if you like break it apart and like get some white space in there and not just jumble everything onto your page, it's obviously like even easier to read. So that's just like something to consider if you have any ability to do that. And you also like want to check this on mobile, obviously, because that could be a horrible mistake. Focus state, which was mentioned, is also like really big for sighted users who don't use a mouse. So if you're a sighted user that uses a mouse, you may have experienced that issue where like sometimes you lose your mouse pointer, and it could be anywhere on your screen, you don't know. On the Mac, you can like jiggle the mouse and it will get really big and you'll find it again. So if you're using a keyboard, you can't jiggle your mouse to find where your focus is. So instead you have these things that are focus state outlines. And on Google, they use both a blue outline and a fuzzy gray outline to convey where your like equivalent to a mouse pointer is. It's really easy to change these. It's really, really easy to get rid of them, and a lot of designers really like getting rid of them. And a lot of like themes that you put into Bootstrap or that sort of thing also really like getting rid of them. So it's important to make sure that there's something there, because this, again, is like the equivalent of their mouse pointer. And if it's gone, they're losing their way of knowing what is being interacted with on the screen. Autoplay. Just don't do it, right? I mean, it's bad for people with screen readers. It's bad for people with attention disorders, anxiety disorders. It's bad for people with seizures, bad for people with migraines, bad for humanity. Just say no if you can, push back. And finally, modals are like the bane of many people's existences, both as a dev and a user with accessibility needs, I feel like. We can all agree that they're just kind of thrown on there because no one knows how else to display this information. They're kind of hard to code. You end up with like 5 different versions of a modal on your site, and none of them actually look good. That's a modal. There's 2 main problems with modals as far as accessibility goes. One of them is that they'll pop up and they won't pass that focus to anything. So the person's still actually navigating the site behind the modal as the modal's like doing its own thing. This was also the puppy picture site. It was very sad. Could not interact with the lever and find out what it does. But yeah, and that also goes in to the second problem with modals, which is that even if you get focus to them, you might not be able to close them. So like a lot of people in that informal survey were like, non-dismissible modals I can't get rid of, that sort of thing. Like even as a user with like who's sighted, who's using a mouse, sometimes it's really hard to close a modal. Like there's no close button. The X is like small and weirdly placed. It's even worse for someone that's not using a mouse. And in this case, there's like a few options that you actually have for this. And I'm sorry to say they're JavaScript. There is HTML you can use to do like a really good dialogue, but not all browsers are compatible with it. So you're stuck with this. But the #1 thing you should always do with a modal is create what's called an event listener. So you're like listening to what happens with the user, and when they press escape, you close the modal. It's really easy. I know. Escape key, get rid of something. Mind-boggling. And then the other thing you can do is just make sure that the exit, the ways you have to exit, the buttons you're using are actually getting focus. So like if you have a little X at the top, make sure that gets focus. Maybe make sure it gets focus first and last, right? So the person doesn't have to go all the way through. Or put 2, right? They can close it right at the beginning with that X, or put a close button at the very bottom so they can close it after going through your entire modal. This is really important because, again, if they can't get rid of that modal, they can't use your site. Like, with the last one, they can use your site, but maybe they can't log in. Maybe they can't sign up for your newsletter. They can't interact with it. But for this one, they just can't use your site. They can't get out of this. They're forever just going to see this modal. And everyone has competitors, right? Like, they're not going to stick around for this. There's something like people leave your site if it doesn't load within a certain amount of seconds. Users definitely leave your site if they can't use it. Yeah. So those are the main things I wanted to go through. It was really quick, but I didn't have a lot of time. I have resources, again, at dragun.tech/pycascades. I link to the little bit about like the modal dialogue that doesn't work on everything, if you're interested in that. And also like the standards for ARIA and a few other things that I mentioned. And I'm also about to put up a survey about screen readers that just went through. That's really good. So if you're interested in that, because screen readers are all kind of different, you'll be able to see that as well. So also I am at Tech Evangelista. And if you want to talk to me, Twitter is probably the best way. It's a little depressing on my feed, though, so you might not want to follow me. I don't know. Yeah, so thank you.